Good evening, and welcome to the inaugural James A. Thurber Dialogue in American Democracy, the first in a series of such dialogues we are hosting this semester. The Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies is proud to sponsor this series, along with our partners at AU's Department of Government, AU's Kennedy Political Union, and the United States Capitol Historical Society. These dialogues celebrate the illustrious career of our beloved colleague, Distinguished University Professor James A. Thurber. Much to our chagrin, Jim is retiring this June after 47 illustrious years studying American democracy, contributing to it, and enlightening others about it. During that time, Jim has done many things, and so I'm sure he'll be angry with me, but I'm going to embarrass him here just a little bit. He's been an award-winning instructor, many congressional staffer, and longtime advisor to both Congress and the executive branch, a journal editor, a documentarian, an acting dean, a director of many things, including this center, which he founded, a sponsor of more than 350 public events and conferences, a principal investigator on many research grants totaling gazillions of dollars, and an author or editor of over 50 books and monographs, over 40 peer-reviewed journal articles, and well over 100 book chapters and other publications. As a colleague said earlier this week, Jim is American University. When we started talking about these dialogues, we asked Jim who he would like to interview. The first person he mentioned was Senator Booker, who is one of America's most authentic and thoughtful leaders and someone whom we all admire tremendously. We are absolutely thrilled that he is with us here tonight. Okay, so it's now my privilege to hand over the virtual microphone to the Honorable Jane Campbell, President and CEO of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, who among many other achievements served as the first, and I believe still only, female mayor of Cleveland, and had the privilege of working with Mr. Booker when they were both mayors. Jane?
Thank you very much, David. It is an honor to work with American University, particularly as we pay tribute to Jim Thurber. We are very fortunate at the United States Capitol Historical Society, which is the congressionally chartered body to preserve the history of the Capitol and the people who work in it, to have Jim Thurber's guidance. And it is a real privilege to welcome Senator Cory Booker, with whom I do share a little bit of history. When he was mayor of Newark and I was mayor of Cleveland, we both know what it's like to be mayor of tough towns. And then I was the staff director of the Senate Committee on Small Business when Senator Booker came on as a member of my committee. So it is a great privilege. And Senator Booker, you're fortunate to be interviewed by the distinguished man of the hour, Dr. Jim Thurber. So take it away, Dr. Thurber.
Thank you, Jane, very much. Welcome, Senator Cory Booker. And we're very pleased that you can take time during this stressful time on the Hill, but also busy time on the Hill, to be with us this evening. I want to start, Senator, why don't you come on and we can see your image. Hi.
Hi, Professor Thurber.
Good. So I'm really pleased to have you here. I've read your book, United Thoughts for Finding Common Ground and Advancing Common Good. Now, let me tell you that this has gotten into my marriage because my wife was bringing it to bed every night. She's a lawyer and a housing advocate also, and but I I brought in Pelosi. So I was reading Pelosi, she was reading your book. So we had equal time about what's going on the Hill. First, I just want to congratulate you for your November re-election as a junior senator from New Jersey. You earned 57% of the vote, but I'm a little perplexed. And I was wondering whether you're concerned about this. The New Jersey referendum on legalization of marijuana got 67% and 200,000 more votes than you did. Was there a lot of ticket splitting going on there, do you think?
I am blessed to have a significant other named Rosario, and when she filled out her ballot at home, she and I have just moved in together, and I was very distressed when she went to go check that box to vote for marijuana before she got near my box. So I know what you say about marital issues already.
Right.
But sir, if I can just step back for a second and just tell you what an honor it is to sit with you this evening. And, you know, I've long since come to realize that we have statespeople in our nation, not just those who hold elected office, but people who stand as foot soldiers, committed to our democracy, committed to our continuance as a nation and our highest ideals. You are most certainly that. And it is my privilege in this lecture series to have the honor of sitting with you now as you all inaugurate it. Thank you for giving me that privilege and that honor, and I have so much respect and gratitude for you.
Well, thank you. It is going to be just a conversation, if you don't mind, about our democracy and what some of the major threats are to our democracy now. But let me just remind the audience that of your distinguished background. If I went through all of it, we'd use 1 hour or more. So I'm going to summarize very quickly. You ran for President of the United States, and you participated in 5 debates, and you decided to drop out in January 2020. And now you're in the Senate, and you're on 4 very important committees, especially when we look at the issues facing America right now and Biden's agenda, President Biden's agenda. I'm a bit concerned about the Senate, as many people are, about how gridlocked it is and how polarized it is. And I'd like to start out with a question related to our major threats to our democracy now after this insurgency and these COVID deaths and the failing economy. How in the world can you get the votes in the Senate and follow what you say so well in your book of bipartisanship? Let me just read something from your book that was quite moving to me. You write movingly that you need grace, love, forgiveness, and redemption, almost like a minister. And you learned this from your parents and your mentors along the way in our search for a more perfect union. How can you use those things when the other party doesn't seem to be wanting to reach back and work with you? How's that going to work?
Well, if you let me step back, I'm very worried about the ideals of democracy. This old audacious idea that the people in a forum can help to live the best quality of life, to have an abundance of sorts that can pull from the best of humanity, that can create freedom and justice and a better way of life. And the reason why I say that is because we live on a planet right now where the scorecard between authoritarian governments and democracies, the last 20 years or so hasn't been so good. From Turkey lurching back towards authoritarianism. China got rid of their term limits. They're going more authoritarian. Hungary, I could go through the nations. And democracy is under siege right now globally. And a lot of the same issues that are going on in the United States, you can see going on in other places. And so I think that the conversation we're having right now, because America has always been, we're the oldest constitutional democracy. It has been the hope of freedom and the common values we hold. And I'm not saying we've been perfect in our efforts. And our history is one of wretched challenges and inability to live up to our common ideals. And so when you ask me about the Senate now, I just first want to just say, you said sort of sounding like a sermon in my book and pulling from a lot of those ideals.
It was a good sermon.
Thank you very much. That I think that those ideals are our only hope. The partisan combat right now is not serving our nation. And unless we can find a way out of this trap, we are in trouble. And one of my favorite moments as a presidential candidate, I was running for a town hall stage, and I'm about to jump on it. And a big, large guy at the bottom of the stage grabs me and goes, with all kind of enthusiasm, "Dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face." And I looked at him and I said, "Dude, that is a felony." And let me explain to you why that is actually the wrong strategy to try to heal our nation and redeem the soul of our country. And I talked to him went up on the stage, and I shifted a lot of my thoughts for that night to just really talk about that ideal. And so I will give you a lot of practical, tactical issues that we are looking at now in the Senate. But I would like to conclude by just telling you one example. I do Bible study, not because I'm pious, but I wanted to take advantage of every opportunity to get to know my Republican colleagues in the deepest fashion possible. And so I go to a Bible study in a man named Inhofe's office. So you know him as one of the more senior lions of the Senate on the Republican side. And when I walked in, my implicit biases jumped out at me because I was surprised to see a picture of him and a little young black girl. And I asked him about it. And it turns out that she was his adopted daughter. And we had a deeper conversation than I probably would have ever had if I wasn't in his little hideaway office having this conversation. Months later, there is a big education bill going through the United States Senate. And I'm distressed because I wanted to get an amendment on a bill that Lamar Alexander was saying no amendments, and they were protecting it. But the amendment I wanted to give would have disaggregated data to better help homeless and foster children. And I thought to myself that maybe I should go talk to Inhofe. He has adopted a child. And I remember standing on the floor with him, looking skeptical at me as I made my appeal. And he said, "Well, let me think about it." He took the card with the information about it. And I walked back to my side of the aisle. Next thing I see him is him marching over towards me, hands me back my card and says, "I'm in," and then turns around and walks away. And I literally went after him and I go, "Sir," I call my elder senators not by their first names. I go, "Sir, what do you mean?" He goes, "I'm going to co-sponsor your amendment." And next thing you know, with a chairman of a committee co-sponsoring my amendment, we picked up some other Republicans, and it's now the law of the land. And so I'm not naive to say that we have real problems right now, and we can go into them. But I do not want to ever belittle as naivete or as pie in the sky or ineffective idealism, a firm commitment to principles of grace and decency and honor and dare I say love, because I still think that those are the most powerful forces in our democracy, the only real hope for our country.
Well, thank you. The question is whether you can get those kinds of reactions to this big COVID relief bill, and other legislation that's coming down from Biden. Some people are saying, quote, Democrats should act as if they won the election, quote. What was the point of putting together a majority in the Senate if they aren't going to wield it? And they're pushing for changing the filibuster. They're pushing for using reconciliation. What's your reaction to changing the filibuster?
Well, put me in the camp that says we need to push as hard as we can to get the changes that we spoke of and promised in an election. And I don't think, as a person who comes into politics from the perspective of we are still far short of this idea of justice, I I'm sitting here. I think I'm the only senator that lives in a majority Black community, in a community below the poverty line. This last census, the median income where I live is about $14,000 per household. I see people working harder, longer hours than my parents, and they still live below the poverty line. And so when I see an issue like raising the minimum wage, and you're telling me that they're going to filibuster that and not give people a living wage, well, I think we should do everything we can. When I see issues like lead in the water, we have more than 3,000 jurisdictions in America where children have more than twice the blood lead levels in Flint, Michigan. And we don't have a national uproar about all of these lead pipes in the ground. I'm going to do everything I can to make this to put the billions of dollars into a Biden budget to remove those lead. And I can go on with this. And so the question about the filibuster to me is, well, first of all, that's not a sacrosanct element of our nation. It's not a part of our Constitution. It wasn't there in the early days. And when it comes to these issues, I do believe it should be and getting an agenda of justice done. I think it should be on the table. I hope we wouldn't have to go to that. Remember, Mitch McConnell always talks about that Harry Reid broke the Senate. Well, I would counter by saying that Mitch McConnell used a filibuster more against Barack Obama than was used, I think, in every previous presidency combined.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And so that level of obstruction, to solve it, often you have to use unprecedented tactics. And so I don't think this is counter to what I was saying before, because there was a time that we as a country, up until about my lifetime, used to do bipartisan big things. The Eisenhower Highway Act in today's dollars is $1 trillion. To now that system of highways, roads, and bridges has about $1 trillion of infrastructure deficit. In other words, to fix those roads and bridges, we would have to do the Eisenhower Highway Act all over again. That was a Republican president. I'm not sure if my Republican colleagues even believe that we should be spending that kind of money. And so one of the most distressing things to me about our nation right now, in fact, there's a bunch of people in Davos virtually this year, right now. Right. The World Economic Forum actually keeps measures of the competitiveness of democracies. And every one of their indices, in my dad's generation, we were number one on the planet Earth. They keep indices like how much does a country, public and private, invest in R&D. We were the most R&D intensive economy. How well do they educate their kids? We had more college graduates per population than any other nation on the planet Earth. Quality of infrastructure is one. Well, where are we now on most of their measures? Not even in the top 10. China just built 18,000 miles of high-speed rail, that authoritarian nation. Our busiest rail corridor, which you're familiar with, that goes from Boston to DC, no exaggeration, runs half an hour slower than it did in the 1960s. Our education system, the envy of the planet, we are being out-educated. Our research and development, this device right here, you know this, government dollars, the battery life, the satellite navigation. My father was the first Black person hired by IBM as a salesman in the Virginia, DC area. And one of the reasons why we got the edge on computing was because the government was buying massive mainframes and helping to move that research. All of those things that were bipartisan initiatives to make America stand out on the planet, there's not always a bipartisan commitment to now. Well, public education, infrastructure, research and development. I can show you, if you're a fiscal conservative, that $1 invested in medical research at the NIH, for example, would return to the taxpayer $5 in economic growth and possibility. So I do think we're having a competition of ideas right now. And I think we are falling behind globally on issues that threaten not only our democracy, but threaten the very ideals that we herald.
Would you think that if the Senate went forward with infrastructure investment, that there would be more bipartisan support for that. I always thought that that was, not Democrat or Republican. Everybody wants their bridges maintained. They want to replace their water systems. Is it that politicized?
Well, I'm going to do something bold. I'm going to tell you right now that we'll get some kind of infrastructure bill passed. Now, I could very much regret saying that because if we fail to, but I'm wondering what we're talking about a 20th century infrastructure. I don't want to just repair the old. We are so falling behind on infrastructure, on everything from universal broadband. We are competing with South Korean kids, Japanese kids, German kids, 100% broadband penetration. We don't have it in this country. It is literally costing us money.
But isn't there support from the Republicans for that also?
There is verbal support right now. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is if we wanted to get back ahead of the rest of the planet, building an infrastructure which the free market would take that like they did back in the 1950s and build the greatest economy on the planet in, we have a lot more investment, a lot bolder and bigger investment that we would need to do, like a Republican president named Eisenhower, who did a very bold investment. And this is the time to do it when the cost of capital is so low and the economy is in such need of job creation.
You're on a key committee, Committee on Environment and Public Works, that will be able to push some of that. You're also on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I want to know what keeps you awake at night when we think of the threats to the United States. You know about them. You've had hearings. You know about Russia, China, Iran. What keeps you awake at night?
Look, there's no threat on the planet Earth that is greater than what we can handle when Americans come together and stand together. You ask me what keeps me up at night, it's how much we hate each other. There's more vitriol for other Americans than there are for the people that I know from my intelligence briefings are plotting every day, like the Russians, to undermine our democracy. So I could go through the threat assessment that we get in a classified way with those parts of it that are public. There are really tough areas. Obviously North Korea, obviously Iran, obviously Russia. But my bigger concern right now is we meet those threats. I think it was 1954 that people always ask, when did we become the superpower? And many people will say, oh, after World War II. Well, it was actually the first time we really challenged England, the United Kingdom, was in the Suez Crisis.
Yeah.
And the way we yanked their chain and showed our dominance wasn't through our military. It was through the strength of our economy. We held their debt. And so what I don't think Americans, from a policy perspective, we need to understand that our ability to lead the planet, and there are crises. I just finished speaking to some of Joe Biden's foreign policy nominees because I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee. I got to confirm them. And we talked about scary things. What's happening in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa right now can spin out into a horrible disaster. What's happening with the vaccine inequalities, where we have the 30, 40 poorest countries having nobody vaccinated. I could go through the refugee crises, the challenge of climate change globally and what that might do. But our ability as a country to strongly face those challenges will come from our ability to come together and build a society that is the light unto the world, to steal from a Hebrew prophet. And that's what I'm worried about right now, is us losing our edge because we have a failure to come together and think big and plan big, look to the future, look to the horizon, have a president, I don't care who they are in our generation, that doesn't just speak to my next election cycle, but says, hey, by the end of the decade, we'll do our moonshot in this generation and defy gravity.
So we're in the middle of a COVID pandemic. We're going to, looks like, hit 500,000 deaths here soon. And that has revealed problems in the United States, problems of systemic racism. Along with that, we've had white supremacy movements that were partially behind this invasion of our capital, the insurgents. You're very concerned about this. I've heard you speak on this. how do you work against systemic racism and white supremacy in America today, so we can come together and work towards those goals that you?
I want to tell you, there are two very different problems. They're cousins of each other. So white supremacy is the terrorism that we should be most concerned about in our country, because the facts are the facts. Since 9/11, the majority of the terrorist attacks have been right-wing extremists, and most of those have been white supremacists. So from a synagogue in Pittsburgh to a church in South Carolina, we have seen these terrorist attacks happening with chilling regularity. That is something that we need to face down. It is overt bigotry against Blacks and Jews and Muslims and Asian Americans and more. And I had again, we're doing a lot of these as senators now, talking to the head of the Department of Justice, the nominee Merrick Garland, and many of his staffs that have to be Senate confirmed. And this was one of the things I most wanted to talk to him about, strategies. Systemic racism is a little different.
Yes.
And the challenge I see, one of the challenges I see is we don't even articulate it or recognize it as the insidious problem that it is in our society. You know, the drug war is being driven by implicit racial biases. I grew up and my parents had to get a white couple to pose as them. Literally, my father and the volunteer lawyer, after they exposed the ruse, and it wasn't the white couple, it was my dad, the lawyer got attacked. That's white supremacy. We punched him.
And you write about this in your book. It's quite moving, actually, to hear about it.
Right. And so I grew up in this relatively affluent white community, majority white community, where I watched friends of mine break lots of laws, from drug laws to, you know, some friends of mine got in trouble for trying to get some beer, broke into a liquor store. That's breaking and entering. They experienced an entirely different justice system than what I see in communities like the one I live in right now. And it's dramatic. There's more marijuana arrests in recent years for possession than all the violent crime arrests combined. And so you have people who've had their lives destroyed for doing things that two of the last four presidents admitted to doing. And when I say that, you have a felony conviction for possession of marijuana. There are over 40,000 things as the American Bar Association points out, you can't do. You can't get a job, can't get a business license, can't get housing. I just fought with the Trump administration because they were saying you can't get PPP grants and loans. And so when I look at my community, implicit bias, systemic racism is such a corrosive force, from healthcare to the criminal justice system to even the ability to breathe clean air and drink clean water. The number one predictor of whether you are being poisoned by environmental injustices is the color of your skin. And so the problem is we have grown comfortable with these injustices. And part of the challenge of grappling with that is it's hard to grapple with something that you don't even admit is a problem. But here is the challenge, and what I tried, as you said, to say in my book, is what we don't understand is that we are so connected to each other in this country. As King would say eloquently, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in one garment of destiny. McKinsey, the consulting firm, just put out, because of these persistent wealth disparities, for example, it costs our overall economy about $1.5 trillion. When the president rightfully just unveiled his efforts on systemic racism, Susan Rice, who talked about she used, for example, the systemic racism that still exists in home ownership in our country, costing trillions of dollars to the entire economy. And so we are all hurting from this, but it's more like we're frogs in that boiling water and don't realize that our country is at risk if we don't find a way to start speaking truth to the realities that exist of two systems, and then have constructive strategies to address those injustices.
So you're on the Committee on Judiciary. You've come up with a proposal to deal with systemic racism with the police, policing in America. You're not saying let's cut back funding for the police. You have a way to judge police forces and have a national list of people who've had some problems in policing. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so after the horrific murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Vice President Harris and I got together with some amazing leaders in the House, Chairman Nadler and Karen Bass, Congresswoman Bass, and put together a bill that we thought could make real change. And it has a number of different sort of tranches. One is banning behaviors that just should not go on. No knock warrants for nonviolent drug offenses, carotid chokeholds. Another one was let's get complete transparency into police misconduct, so that whether it's activists or state legislators, you could see more clearly the reporting of problems. And then the other one is just something that we should all believe in, that no one is above the law, and police officers shouldn't be, who do horrible, horrible things, shouldn't be banned from accountability in the civil side, right now blocked by something called qualified immunity, right, or the criminal side, right now blocked from an very hard to reachable willfulness standard when those things happen. So this is not a comprehensive bill. There's a lot more that needs to be done in policing, but it's a bill that we believe could have saved Breonna Taylor's life, could have saved Eric Garner's life, and if it didn't save their lives, at least the police officers involved in that would have been held accountable. But I will say this: that we were making progress before those horrible murders. The task force, the 21st Century Task Force on Policing, that President Obama and Vice President Biden put into place, it had big city police chiefs, people representing police, and Black Lives Matter activists sitting at the table. They came up with a host of recommendations that offered a lot of promise that then were shelved under the Trump administration. And then Jeff Sessions reversed a lot of the police accountability measures like consent decrees. So my conversations with the Biden administration give me hope, not only for our legislation, but also that we will have this partnership again, because police officers, it's a guy who ran a police department. So they're some of the bravest human beings I've ever seen, who desperately want to have a nation where no one, like I do, and I have in my life, fears the police because of the levels of misconduct or the number of Black men being killed, and Black women as well, unjustly by police.
So let me shift the topic slightly. There's an impeachment trial that will occur. Most people are saying that there's not enough votes to convict President Trump. Some, and I'd like your reaction to this, some are wanting censure. Senator Tim Kaine, your colleague, is looking at censure as a way to sanction Trump, trying to use Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. You're a lawyer, it gets a little wonky, but are you on board with that?
Well, first of all, I love that you mentioned Tim Kaine. In apropos of our earlier part of this conversation, he's one of the more pastoral men in the United States Senate. He's a righteous soul.
It helps to have been a missionary for a while.
Yes, yes. And I love to look to him about, because we struggle. There's a lot of times when you're in the Senate where you are struggling with issues. Well, what is the morally right thing to do? And I think a lot of us are fearing now that 20 years from now, 25 years, there might come along another president with authoritarian tendencies who will not have learned anything from the Trump chapter, but to be more successful in the attempts to undermine democratic processes. That we have to right now send a bipartisan signal that what happened was awful and a darker moment. And to see apologists already trying to make nothing of it, and to see a scenario where we fail to convict him in impeachment and nothing happens is very distressing to me. So I think the trial is important, especially if it brings a lot of more information is getting to light as they prepare their case. But I think that we should, especially if this fails, be looking towards censure. So at least history will see that a bipartisan group of senators said this is not right, this is not just, and history should know that those who believe in this nation, democracy, and our democratic processes, and in truth, were vindicated in some way
But you think it's a good approach if there's a failed conviction? So-
I think that this, I would be worried if it wasn't being talked about right now, because I felt disappointed that censure did not get serious play when I believe Donald Trump tried to coerce another power to get involved in our elections in his first attempt.
Right. So another question that's related to the work of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, and Jane Campbell's a real leader on this discussion, and I behind the scenes have been helpful, I hope. And that is, we want to make sure that the Capitol has safe public access. You know, you go around the world, most legislatures, you need to get a special appointment to even get inside them. We now have a visitor center that helps on the security side. We had that before the invasion of the surgeons. How do you feel about maintaining public access to the Capitol?
So first of all, I'm glad you brought the mayor's name up again, invoked that incredible public servant that she is, and I'm grateful for that.
You both had the same kinds of issues in your towns at the same time. It's incredible. Yeah.
So I'm fortunate to be sitting in Newark right now, where in the progressive movement, it was some of our town leaders that just said libraries should not be these places where like you go and request book. They sort of democratized the ideas of libraries, museums, and that ideal to me is so important. And so I think that the Capitol, the more accessible, the more transparent, the more available this democracy, its documents and its texts are, the greater the democracy to anyone. A lot of people are looking at the Capitol right now and saying, well, it's really safe and secure. I think that the level of military that's there right now, God bless those soldiers, are amazing people, and the Capitol Police, but I think it's a sign of weakness that our democracy has gotten to the point where we need the military to protect that citadel of democracy.
So it's been proposed that we have the acting chief of police for the Capitol Police is recommending a fence and more force, more show of force. What do you think?
I think it's sad. I think it's sad. We should do what's necessary to protect Capitol and personnel, but and I hope that we go through the deliberative process of what is best to protect the Capitol institution. But isn't there a deeper problem and failure that it's even necessary? And shouldn't we be having a larger conversation as a country about how we prevent that necessity? That if the biggest fears we have these days are protecting each other from each other, shouldn't we be convening a real commitment to national healing and a revival of civic grace, so that we don't have to continue to plunge into a society where these incredible points of light get smothered by barbed wire and fence?
Well, this brings up a very sensitive topic, and that is when the Capitol was attacked, you were one of the last people to leave the Senate floor. And I've heard you say that there was a man immediately behind you on the Senate floor waving a large Confederate flag. It was shocking to you. What was your reaction to that?
So to be precise, that flag was being waved right outside of the door of the United States Senate.
Oh, I thought it was on the floor. Sorry.
No. We were taken off by very brave Capitol Police officers. I was very worried about a lot of my colleagues who can't sprint for cover. So I did hold back at the end.
Well, as a split end, we know you can sprint.
I can sprint and tussle if I have to. But I mean, look, that was one of the more, I always say, if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. And that was one of the top heartbreaking moments of my life. that a flag that's so sinister. That's not the actual Confederate flag, you know that this is a horrific symbol of oppression and violence and injustice that is so hurtful to millions of Americans. And even during the Confederacy, and I know you've studied the Civil War probably better than I have, they tried to take our capital. They did one kind of run to try to take the capital of the United States of America and failed.
Right.
And so to have this moment where someone so triumphantly, so gleefully, so hatefully would dare bring that flag into that sacred civic space, there was a part of me that was really just broken that night. And it still hurts me, because for me, that kind of hate and bigotry, as a United States senator who's surrounded by, as you just said, security and the like, and is paid by the taxpayer by a comfortable strategy, but that oppressive sentiment, which still has space in our country, where people are still making space for it, it does real damage to the lives of so many. And so I got very emotional on the Senate floor when we returned, and I just worry that we are not having the kind of reckoning with our past that people like Brian Stevenson and some other heroes in this country are trying to get America to look at itself, to truly see ourselves, to know ourselves. Because as Socrates says, the unexamined life, we have some self-examination to do. And going back to this threats to our country, if you go back and read King's letters to a Birmingham jail, what struck me in my early study of that document was not that it wasn't a letter to the white supremacists. It wasn't a letter to the white citizens councils. No, he was writing to good people who were doing nothing, who had grown comfortable with injustice and didn't see the urgency. And I just fear that in this country we are at a point of reckoning where we are called, whether you're independent, Republican, or Democrat, we are called to a reckoning, and we're failing to answer that call in a way that's going to hurt us all and further plunge us into instability or dysfunction. And that the high calling that so many great Americans, from Judge Learned Hand to Martin Luther King, the higher spiritual calling that has to animate us and sustain our society to love one another. Well, love necessitates knowledge, knowing each other, and knowing with a courageous empathy, knowing what our brothers and sisters are going through. And I think that is the work of our day. And I wish I had a more sanguine or optimistic view on our ability to rise to this occasion. I'm a prisoner of hope and always will be, that we will rise to this occasion. But I'm not naive to the challenges before us.
Senator, some would say that some of your colleagues are not doing enough self-reflection on this, that they are comfortable with this injustice. They're comfortable now with people who support QAnon and have threatened the Speaker of the House of Representatives and other members in the House and the Senate, and they're in the House. The Senate is a different place. It's like a family, but it's highly polarized, and there's some expression sometimes of hatred back and forth. How in the world can we get out of that cycle in the Senate at this point? Break gridlock, break up this polarization in the body, and try to lead a little bit to help the electorate come along with that. I mean, 47% of the American public voted for Trump, and 80% of those people believe that the election was stolen. And there are many members in the Senate that were either silent or went along with that. Isn't that kind of hard to work with them at this point?
I mean, isn't that hard to even say out loud that there is millions of Americans that believe a lie? And that lie wasn't just perpetrated by Donald Trump. There were a lot of enablers of that lie, from the media to, colleagues in the 535 Congress people. And the only thing I can say is that and by the way, if that alone just doesn't break you up to say that my country that believes in truth and justice and the American way is what we say, has so embraced lies, vicious, dangerous, self-destructive lies. And so the only thing I have to tell you is, on times like this where I can't see the way forward, my faith is buoyed by this unbelievable privilege I've had to serve alongside of people that served in darker days. I served with a guy named John Lewis, who somehow held on to his faith when he faced vicious lies that were the law of the land, that were enshrined in law, that was beaten mercilessly, knocked unconscious, had his head cracked open. And I remember right before I declared my candidacy, he gave me one of the greatest moments of my life was when I got in a car with him in Atlanta, and we went on a road trip to go see Jimmy Carter. And it was one of the more beautiful moments of my life to sit with two moral men who now in their elder years, understanding that time is short, didn't necessarily always want to talk policy, but really wanted to speak to the soul of others who might listen. And so if I can leave you with John Lewis's, in answer to this question, like, his gift to me is sometimes you can't get obsessed with winning and the victory. What you need to focus on is the next step. Can I step with grace? Can I extend empathy and compassion to even those who curse me and hate me? Can I defend those who make life better for someone who's being oppressed or hurt? Can I still find joy in this nation? And so I don't know the answers, but I definitely know from models like him who come from darker chapters in American history. I know that, as a recent president said, as John Lewis lived, that weeping may endure through the night, but if you stay faithful, that joy can come in the morning.
This reminds me of Amanda Gorton's poem. She's the first U.S. Youth Poet Laureate, as you know. And just a little phrase out of her poem, I'd like to read it and get your reaction. She said, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. What's your light, Senator Booker? What do you want to do in the future?
So I loved that poem, as America did, and I want to I think about that metaphor a lot, that I want to be a light worker. I want to be someone who doesn't just win partisan battles. I want to be a part of millions of Americans who are committed themselves to illuminating the way forward. And as I said, being a light unto nations. But I will say that what is important about her poem to me is that she took a national moment that was focused on two individuals and flipped it to everybody and brought us all in, and then challenged us to be the light. And I just said this to a classroom. I spoke to a group of law students earlier today, where I said, as much as you want to criticize the world, look at yourself. What am I doing in my life that falls short? Unconsciously sometimes. The clothing I'm buying, am I participating in the oppression of workers? The fruit that I might, what about farm workers? Am I participating in that? And I told them just a presidential campaign moment that I had, where I'm sitting in front of the New York Times editorial board, and it was days before I would drop out, and they had finished the interview and they thought they were going to wrap up with fun and funny questions. And the guy says, I got a speed round. And as you're probably suffering right now, there was no speed round with me. They asked me one question, and it was, tell us about a time that your heart was broken. And I'm still wondering what, like, Bernie Sanders or Amy Klobuchar said. But when he asked me that question, I told you that you don't love this country enough. If if this country hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. And I immediately just told the New York Times folks, I said, look, I lived in high-rise projects up the street here, and there was a group of boys led by a young boy named Hassan Washington, who were these amazing kids. And I smelled marijuana one day and immediately knew there was a problem. Unlike Stanford students or Yale students, they couldn't afford that. And so I rushed.
Or Oxford students.
Or Oxford students, yes. And so I rushed to intervene on them, to help them and mentor them. And I made a lot of promises to them. And then as I was trying to fulfill them, connecting with mentors, I got busy running for the office, running for mayor, that big, and justifying to myself that I'll be able to help thousands of children. And I can't follow through with these kids now, but in the future, when I'm not as busy, I'll do more. But I would still come home every night, and they'd be in the lobby of the building, and they would encourage me, they would nurture me. And Hassan Washington, who had this spirit just like my dad, they were both born poor, to a single mother, raised by their grandparents. He had the same wit as my father, the same leadership qualities. He just was a light for me. Eventually, I was elected. I had death threats on my life, and they put police officers around me, stationed them in the projects, safest ahead. Those buildings had been in a long time, but the kids didn't hang out in the lobby anymore, and I'd sort of lost track of them. But at that time, I was fighting the big fights, running the big hill. And I'll never forget, I would go to the sites of shootings in that summer. I was elected in the summer, violent summer in our city. And 2 blocks from where I'm sitting right now, there was a shooting. I ran to the scene. There was a body covered up on the pavement, another one being loaded into the ambulance. And I thought that I was just ministering to the living. But when I got home that night and I looked for the police report, I see the name of the murdered child, Hassan Washington.
Yeah.
And it was a seminal moment for me in my life, because I think all of us being committed to the big change, the big election, is really important. But all of us are more powerful than we know, more influential than we realize. And a lot of it has to do with not whatever's coming up in a month or 2 months, but what we do today. How we extend grace today, what we post on social media today. Does it encapsulate our heart? Are we focused on its impact? And I don't know what my career will render, but I want to be able to say, when I'm ready to retire, that I not just talk about legislation I passed, or I just want to say that I try to live every day as the best I could be, because I now know that those decisions reverberate in time in ways that affect another and affect another and affect another. And in fact, I think that's the only salvation we're going to have, not by a hero, be they a president or a senator, but by millions of people who find humble ways to be heroic.
Thank you very much. You're the first of 3 of these conversations, dialogues. The other 2 people will be talking about the same issues, probably not as moving as you, Senator. Ann Applebaum is coming in on February 24th, and Robert Putnam and Shaylin, Romney, Garrett have written Upswing. It's on the same topic as your book with a lot of data. I love data. And they're coming in on March 24th. Thank you so much for being in this initial discussion of our democracy and what it's facing and how to get out of it. Thank you.
I'm so grateful you give me this privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.